Good morning, students. I have started this chapter that is and industrial strategies 1947 to 1990, and few topic I have already discussed, like importance of industry and state participation in industrial development, or what is the role of government in industrial development. For development of industry, government make a resolution in 1956 that is very famously known as Industrial Policy Resolution 1956. In this resolution, government made certain decision for industrial development. And the first decision was uh, government classified industries on the basis of ownership, and this strategy is known as, there are three policies, major policy taken in 1956 in industrial policy resolution. First one is threefold classification of industry, second one is industrial licensing, and third one is industrial concessions. In first policy, that is threefold classification of industry, in a previous video I have discussed in detail, but again I am repeating it. According to Industrial Policy Resolution 1956, the industries were reclassified into three categories, and these are known as Schedule A, Schedule B, and Schedule C. In Schedule A, 17 industries. In Schedule A, 17 industries were included, and in this country, those industries were taken which would be exclusively managed and controlled by the state. These 17 industries were controlled and managed by the state, means government. And the examples of the industries are like railway, defense equipment, atomic energy, heavy and core industries, aircraft, oil. Basically, those industries were taken which are directly related to the safety and security of the country and welfare of the country. Second one is Schedule B, 12 industries. 12 industries were taken into consideration. In this schedule, 12 industries were placed, and which would be progressively state owned. The state would take initiative of setting up industries, and private sector supplement effort of the state. Basically, these 12 industries will be managed by both private sector and public sector, but public sector will play a leading role and private sector will work as a subsidiary. And in this schedule, mining industries, fertilizers, machines, tools were taken. And then Schedule C, the sectors, those industries were taken into Schedule C which were left in Schedule A and Schedule B. Remaining industries, those were not into the consideration of Schedule A, Schedule B, came into the category of Schedule C. This schedule consists of remaining industries which were to be in the private sector. Basically, the state would facilitate and encourage the development of these industries. These industries were controlled by the state through a system of license enforced under Industrial Development Regulation Act 1991. Now, the threefold classification of industry I have discussed in previous video also, and revise it today. Now, next step in this resolution, that is Industrial Policy Resolution 1956, after classification of industries, second initiative taken by the government, that is industrial licensing. Then what is industrial licensing? Industrial licensing is a written permission. Industrial licensing is written permission from the government to an industrial unit to manufacture goods. Means if any industrialist wanted to establish an industry, first he has to take permission in the form of license, and is in the granting license to the industrialists or private sector. There there are three bases, or three, not only establishing a new industry. The industrialists have to take license or permission from the government. First one is to setting up the new industry, and second one is expansion of existing ones. Means after setting industry, if the industrialists want to expand their goods, then in that case they have to take permission or license from the government. Or if the industrialists want to diversify their product, in that case they have to take permission from the government in the form of license. So basically in three reason where the industrialists have to take permission or license from the government. First one, setting up a new industry or expansion of new ones, and diversification of product. We can also say that industries in the private sector could be only established through the license from the government. The private industries can only set up with the license from the government. Without license, a private sector cannot set up an industry in the economy. The basic idea of licensing policy was to encourage industry in backward region of the country. This was to promote regional equality. Government encouraged industrialists to establish the industry in backward region. This because this will lead to regional equality. The license was needed not only to establishing a new enterprises, but also for expanding production capacity of the existing ones, and also for diversification of product. This was to regulate the allocation of resources to different uses. The focus was to promote social welfare rather than private profit. Now you must have understand what is industrial licensing, and in which case government provide license to the private investor or industrialist. Or basically on the three cases, government will give license to the investors or in entrepreneur. In first case, setting up new industry, if the industrialist want to set up an industry, they have to take license from the government or permission from the government. Another name of licensing is kind of written permission. And second one is expansion of new industries. And third one is diversification of product. And all this step started by the government, because government is more interested in promote social welfare rather than private profit. Next major step of government in Industrial Policy Resolution 1956 is industrial concession. As I discussed that the basic idea of licensing policy was to encourage industry in backward region of the country. The private entrepreneur were offered many kinds of industrial concession, and here concession means relaxation, for establishing industry in the backward region of the country. Government wanted that the private sector should establish their industry in the backward region of the country, because the government wanted social equity and social welfare. So government encouraged private sector entrepreneur to establish their industry in the backward region of the country, and for this government offered many kinds of concession for establishing industry in the backward region of the country. These concession includes, first one is known as tax holiday. Tax holiday means freedom from the payment of tax for some time. Freedom from the payment of tax for some time. And second relaxation or concession was subsidized power supply. Power supply means electricity supply. Means government will provide a facility or electrical supply to those industrialists who will establish their industry in backward region and at subsidized rate. And what is subsidy? I have discussed in my earlier video. Subsidy is the kind of relaxation in the price, and which price is offered by the government. Means the industrialists will get electricity or energy in the lower rate as compared with the market rate. So government give offered two kind of concession basically. First one is tax holiday, and second one is subsidized power supply if private sector invests in the backward region of the country. Likewise, the policy of industrial licensing, the industrial concession were expected to promote regional equality. The basic aim of the government to promote regional equality and social welfare. That's why government offered concession to the private investor so they can set up their industry in backward region through, and government will offer concessions if they set up their industry in in backward region. And through this, the objective of the government was the social welfare and social equity can be achieved. These are the major policy in industrial policy resolution 1956 were taken. Again I am revising like what is industrial licensing and what is industrial concession. Now, according to industrial licensing, no new industries were allowed unless a license is obtained from the government or written permission taken from the government. It was easier to obtain a license if the industrial unit was established in economically backward area. Such units were given certain concessions like tax benefit and electricity at lower tariff, that because the purpose of the policy was to regional equality. License was needed even if an existing industry want to expand output or diversify production. License to expand production was given only if the government was convinced that there is a need for larger quantity of goods in the economy. If the government realized that there is more demand of goods in the economy, in that case government provide license or give license to the private sector so they can expand their production. So I hope you students, you must have understand what is Industrial Policy Resolution 1956, and in this policy resolution the three policies were made by the government. The first one, threefold classification of industries. It means industries were classified into three categories. Second one is industrial licensing. And what are the provision in industrial licensing that I have discussed. Again I am repeating it. What is licensing? Licensing is written permission from the government to an industrial unit to manufacture goods. Without license, no private sector can invest or set up an industry in India, but that these policies were implemented till 1990. because in this chapter you have to study industrial policy or strategy of the government from 1947 to 1990. So three policies that is made in 1956 were implemented till 1990, and after 1990 new economic policies was formed, that is known as new economic policy 1991, and also known as LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization, where there is tremendous changes took place in the industrial sector. Students, after this discussion, I hope you must understand what is Industrial Policy Resolution 1956. There can be a few questions formed which is important, and that question can come into the examination, final examination. The question can be asked like, why was public sector given a leading role in the Industrial Resolution 1956? Why government gave leading role, more priority to public sector than the private sector in the industrial development, or in Industrial Resolution 1956? As I have already discussed, but again, I am giving in a nutshell, the answer in nutshell, so you can write this answer well. As students, after independence, the industrial development of the country could not be left to the market forces of demand and supply. Instead, public sector was accorded the leading role, giving more stress, because public sector give more stress on social welfare rather than profit maximization. At the time of independence, the industrial development needed a big push of investment, which the private entrepreneurs could not afford. Second is, next thing is, there was no motivation to invest by the private sector because of limited size of the market. Accordingly, private entrepreneurs were reluctant to come forward for the project needed huge investment. Next is, the growth process placed high priority on socialist pattern of society. In socialist pattern of the society, the motive is social justice. This contradicted with the primary objective of profit maximization of private entrepreneurs. This concept contradicts the concept of private entrepreneurship. That's why government gave more importance to public sector rather than private sector in Industrial Resolution 1956. One more question can be framed like, why and how was private sector regulated under Industrial Policy Resolution 1956? Why and how was private sector regulated under IPR 1956? You can write answer in this way. It was to promote the socialistic pattern of society, because in previous video I have discussed India adopted mixed economic system where socialist and capitalist pattern will coexist together. More emphasis were given socialist pattern of the economy, and to promote socialist pattern of society, that then the private sector was, government cannot give emphasis on private sector. For this, private sector was regulated under the IPN 1956. Private sector, there are few restrictions were made to the on the private sector, in the form of, if they have to set up an industry, they have to take permission from the government in the form of license. The private sector was kept under control, state control through a system of license. And not only to set up the industry, they have to take license, but they have to take license in expansion of their industry and diversification of the product. uh, from this topic, two questions I have discussed, and that will be your homework also. You have to write answer of this question, these two questions. One question is, question one is, why was public sector giving a leading role in industrial development or in IPR 1956? And second one is, why and how was private sector regulated under the IPR 1956? That these two questions also came into the, if you will go through the questions of previous year, you will find that that question asked in final examination. Now, in my next video, I will discuss about small scale industry. What is the characteristics and features of small scale industry, and what is the role of small scale industries in the development of India. Thank you.